Welcome, everybody. Um, it's good to see everybody here. Today we're talking about primordial sounds as far back as we can go. We're trying to go back historically into earlier and earlier epochs, which involve earlier periods and deeper areas of the collective unconscious mind. The deeper and the further into the collective unconscious we can go, the more ability we have to tap into a central region that has the true universal plan for what the world really could be, that is far beyond the ability of our small rational mind to conceive, but the deeper regions of ourselves that know how to grow a body and grow a planetary ecosystem the body grows out of, and a solar system and a galaxy and a universe. That part of us is the part that we're trying to open up and get to, and open ourselves to a vision that could arise from there, that we can magnetize through mind linking, through brain entrainment with a soundtrack, to open that part up and move it into the reality of our lives in the next moment from now, making a quantum shift to make things change by linking all of us together at a subconscious level. I would like to show this address here. This is the place where you can go to get today's soundtrack. Every week when I do this broadcast, we listen to a soundtrack at the end together to link ourselves together. And I always post that for 1 week where you can download it for free. scientificsounds.com/Om. Today we're talking about Om, probably the most ancient treatise on sound. And when we, let me go here, the symbol right here. This Sanskrit name of Om goes back all the way to ancient texts that are around 3,700 years old. The Om, or Pranava, prana being the sacred energy that can be scraped out of the normal breath through these transformational filters called the chakras, spinning energy vortexes that have the ability to pull a higher energy out of the normal breath through the exercising of specific chakra zones, 7 different filters, 7 different levels of prana. But the origin, the beginning of all of that is this Om sound. And in reality, this vibrational frequency that's associated with each of the chakras, and each chakra is a step-up transformer for gathering a higher level of prana. For instance, like the first chakra would be diesel oil, and the highest chakra would be 5-star jet fuel, something like that. The idea of Om, or the AUM, the Om, relates back to a series of things, and I'm going to try to knit those together so we can see how the most ancient texts on earth from various spiritual traditions and even religions in various countries who have holy texts, all of those texts begin in the same place. And that place always has to do with some variation of, in the Christian tradition, in the beginning was the Word, which means in the beginning was the vibration. My joke is, in the beginning was the Word, but language hadn't been invented yet. But what is a word? A word is, as we explained before, breath blowing across vocal cords, making a sound vibration, and then it's manipulated by this mechanism in some way, and that forms it into a word. So if in the beginning was the word, really it means in the beginning was the vibration, and then language is this part that manipulates that. So it's a resonance, it's a vibration, it's a sound. When we think about it for a minute, since all of us began in the womb, and that means that at some point in fetal development, the growth phase had gotten to a point where neurodevelopment had reached a point where it became a vehicle for consciousness to now be able to take up resonance. That means that each one of us went through our personal Big Bang. Each one of us had our personal awakening moment of consciousness in a void of some kind. Since the sensory apparatuses of 5 senses hadn't come online yet, we wake up and we're in this indefinable space without language, in the present moment before a thought. And then at some point between 16 and 24 weeks, when the neurodevelopment reaches the point where all 5 senses come online for the first time, we're floating in amniotic body fluid, that's body temperature, and even though the eyes are active, we're in the dark, so these aren't working, and the nose and mouth are filled with fluids, so those aren't working. But sound travels through fluids better than it does through air, 5 times better than it does through air. So our first experience for the first 9 months, and the very first thing that we ever experience, is sound and vibration in the womb. And I discussed this at a point where we can enrich that womb by taking hold of that idea and using it to pump sound into the womb through the mother's belly with headphones or speakers or speaking or singing or playing a musical instrument. Put headphones and play the great music pieces from the great composers. We can enrich that environment, and studies that we've seen in various universities have shown that if you do that with enriched environments and impoverished environments with, say, rats, that the enriched environments can literally boost IQ by up to 10 to 30 points. Once we have vibration coming out of our mouth, and we can manipulate that in various ways, as I discussed last time, where the Sanskrit alphabet, the most ancient alphabet on the planet, except perhaps the Chinese, is the primal set in the, quote, science of vibration in Sanskrit, the primal set of ways that you can manipulate your mouth and your tongue and in order to form syllables. And the Sanskrit alphabet represents the basic set of the number of ways that you can do that. So it forms the, quote, mother tongue. And each culture on earth that has its own language has pulled its total language out of a section of the complete Sanskrit alphabet and pulled that out and made their whole language from that. Other areas of the Sanskrit alphabet are not incorporated into these languages, and various languages and various cultures pull different sections of the total Sanskrit alphabet. For instance, why it's difficult for the Japanese culture to pronounce and the L. and the L is a certain type of way. So if you pronounce L to yourself right now, you can see what you do is you touch the tip of your tongue to what's called the rugae of your top palate, just behind the top front teeth. So you're not touching the teeth, you're touching the top of your palate just behind the teeth with the tip of your tongue. L, la, 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 la. So for some reason, that's not learned, to touch the tongue to the top of the roof of the mouth in that particular culture. And every culture's got its little idiosyncrasy like that, which from the Sanskrit standpoint is each culture arises to express a certain thing that culture represents from a subset of the total of the Sanskrit alphabet, which once more lends itself to the fact that the Sanskrit alphabet was the language of conscious beings, which was the entire set, which when I had mentioned, the books by Ramurti Mishra, and this is another one, it's Fundamentals of Yoga, where he discusses the science of vibration, why he became a Sanskrit scholar, because only by learning Sanskrit itself can you truly and really understand what these ancient texts are trying to impart, because they have concepts and words in Sanskrit that are not easy to translate into any language. The concepts are extremely broad, and different languages can only look at a concept of, say, Om from various angles limited by your language. So when we talk about the word Om, it's a difficult enterprise to enter into, because the Sanskrit meaning of Om is so broad and so multifaceted that it's a difficult thing to translate into English completely. One thing that we do know is that in the most ancient texts in India, the Vedas, which comprises 3 books, 3,700 years old, like I said, the concept of Om is examined in detail in various of these texts. In the 3rd book of the Vedas, in the Upanishads, in the Bhagavad Gita, it's mentioned and talked about in the sutras of Patanjali that I mentioned before, in these Sanskrit verses that you chant. And the concept really is the A-U-M, the not so much Om, but Aum. And, when we look at the most ancient texts that exist on the planet, like the Vedas, Upanishads, and Patanjali's texts, and we're looking at it in this extremely ancient language, designed by supposedly conscious beings. The concept of Om is everywhere. The original sound. I've got an example here I want to play. So I want to show you where you can get the soundtrack from where I'm playing it. I'm going to switch my screen over here. This is the address up here. Give you time to write this down. So I hope everybody got that. If you didn't, I'll make sure I post that address so that you can get it. When we pick apart the idea of what Om is really about, this idea of A-U-M, really what we're doing is it's more of an ah, an ah, and that is doing something with the mouth cavity that is encompassing all possible vowels to the moment when the lips touch, where it becomes a consonant. Now, back in the 60s, when I was on my spiritual searches and was getting involved in all kinds of different things, different meditation practices, exploring esoteric ideas and concepts and spiritualities from different cultures, exploring my own culture, exploring esoteric Christianity in relation to these other spiritual practices from different countries, and realizing that what is said in these ancient texts in the Upanishads and the Vedas and the Sutras of Patanjali about the science of vibration, and the concept of Om and the concept of Aum, really, as the original bass sound, that has a direct relationship to the Sanskrit alphabet being, as I mentioned before last time, being kind of like an alphabetical astrology chart. In other words, each of the letters forms archetype personality type. And if you could do your Vedic astrology chart and find out which of those is your archetype, that was the one that you clothed your mouth when you chanted. You clothed it in this Sanskrit syllable to point your energies at the highest of your archetype that you could be. Something similar is in every language, is in our language, is in English, for instance, where our own alphabet of 26 letters forms its own kind of alphabet astrology, so to speak. And that's got to do with the fact that each letter, as we pronounce it, is us forming a three-dimensional mechanical energy wave sound shape in air molecules. Remember I talked about if I say my name, Jeffrey Thompson, and we do it on a recording frequency analysis scope, a spectral analysis, we can see that there's a shape of Jeffrey Thompson on a computer screen. In reality, it's a three-dimensional shape of sound waves formed by shaping my mouth. And this is similar to when we pronounce each letter of the alphabet: A, B, C, D, E. If you just do those, if you pronounce the first four letters, A, B, C, D, E, and you see what you do with your mouth, what do you do with your tongue, what do you do with the shape, you'll see that you are using this instrument in order to shape the frequencies that come out. And as we said before, the shape of those frequencies is a pure energy wave moving through a medium that we call sound, but that's only because the energy wave is vibrating between 20 and 20,000 cycles per second. And we've got a mechanism invented to pick it up, and then we put some name on it. But in reality, the wavefront is hitting your whole body, and it's having an impact with distorting and torquing and compressing the skin cells and the four sensors for vibration sense that are firing nerve signals into the spinal cord up into my brain. It's activating all of the crystalline structure of the microtubules that connect all the cells together and within the cell, and creating a similar shaped wavefront of electromagnetic piezoelectric energy moving through my body. And then that energy is going to pass into the areas of paths of least resistance to electrical flow in my body. By definition, that's the acupuncture meridians. So we're charging the acupuncture meridians and various areas in our physical structure with the pure energy waveform of a mechanical energy wave that we call sound when it impacts my body. So close on to this idea is the idea of what the Aum thing is doing. It's a primordially recognizable movement of my facial muscles and my tongue and my mouth shape and the resonance of my vocal cords connected with my breath, and the breath is closely associated with my emotions. Why? Because when I have just physiologically, if I get more excited, I breathe harder, and that raises my heart rate because the heart and the breath are hardwired together. As a matter of fact, in school, you study them together as a unit called cardiopulmonary physiology. Cardio, heart, pulmonary, lungs. What one does instantaneously affects the other. So if I breathe harder, my heart rate goes up. If I breathe slower, the heart rate goes down. If I get relaxed emotionally, it causes my respiration and my heart rate to go down. And if I get more excited, it causes both of those to go up. So emotions have a direct effect in the autonomic nervous system through the sympathetic and the parasympathetic directly into control of heart and respiration, which are hardwired into the limbic system that's directly connected to my breath. So if I'm blowing my breath and I'm manipulating the sound, and the sound is an extremely primordially recognizable activity of my mouth and my respiration and my breath, resonating my vocal cords, then that's another way that we can use to tap recognition at an extremely deep collective unconscious level and wake that part of us up. That's the true power of the Aum thing. Well, back in the 60s, I got into astrology and I got into numerology, and I eventually became a professional numerology practitioner, analyzing the letters in your name and the numbers that they add up to. But that evolved into, once I began studying Sanskrit, an idea dropped into my mind. And it happened while I was in Dr. Mishra's Sanskrit chanting evening. So at the Ananda Ashram, Dr. Mishra would sit in a big chair and everybody would be in the room, and he would be leading the chant of these sutras of Patanjali, which are almost 4,000 years old, in Sanskrit. So we're chanting these Sanskrit shapes and filling the room with this Sanskrit shape vibration, and that's having an effect. And I remember in one of those, closing my eyes and meditating while we're chanting all of this and feeling myself in it, and I went into a vision. In this vision, I'm in a cave. It's a big cave. It's a huge cage, a huge cave. It's large, but it's dark. So setting the stage here, there's a dais, a stage, and beyond the stage is a very large chamber, a cave chamber. I know it's large because of the echo pattern, but the cave beyond this stage is dark, so I can't see what's there. I can tell it's big because I can hear the echoes. The stage is lit with torches and candles, and on the stage are these three monks. They're dressed in some kind of ancient robe garbs with some kind of a thing on their head. And there's a big pedestal, and there's a big giant book on this pedestal. And the one monk in the center, and there's two on the two sides. I'm behind him at the back of this stage. He's got a brush like a Japanese calligraphy brush. And this big, giant, kind of ancient-looking book, all the pages are blank. And he's chanting the alphabet. He's chanting the letter A. Oh, so it's now A. So you can see what happens when you are doing something with your mouth here. Instead of ah, A. A. Do it yourself and see what your mouth has to do. A. So now it's the chant of A. And there are a lot of people in this dark, cavernous space out there that are chanting this A along with this monk. So that's how I know that the chamber is big. He's chanting A, and the two monks on either side are chanting along with him. And the whole audience, whoever is out there, is chanting this letter A. And as it's being chanted, he's inscribing it on this page with this brush. And it's the capital letter A, the big letter A. Capital. And underneath it appears this meaning for the letter A. Stability, the strength to stand alone, appears underneath this letter on the page. And I'm looking at this going, what does that mean? What is this going? What are they doing? What's going on? And then I felt somebody tugging on my pants leg, and I looked down, and there's this kind of funny little, like leprechaun type of person in a funny little costume, like a version of a jester's costume. And he's pulling on my leg and he's saying, yes, yes, can't you see that the A is like two legs standing, and they're standing apart, so it's a good solid stance, like a martial arts stance. Legs apart, good foundation, but just to make sure that they're really, really strong, they're strapped together with a bar. So now it's extremely powerful foundation, and that's why it says stability, the strength to stand alone. And then he turns the page, and he pronounces the next letter, B. And now it's B, now while he writes this thing, and then something comes out underneath, and this led to a new form of numerology that was not so much concerned about the letters, about the numbers that the letters equal and what the number part of that is, but the letters themselves and the power that they impact into your body by blowing that shape into your body as a direct impact in the Sanskrit science of vibration, which means that your name becomes important, that words become important, that pronunciations of language and concepts becomes important. So when I say the concept of God or humanity or peace or love or hate, those have power in themselves as a sound form that comes out because of the letters that are used. And the letters only represent the shape. So when I talk about the letter A, I'm talking about a thing that I do with my mouth that shapes an energy waveform that's shooting out and impacting your body and causing this cascade of piezoelectric effects and all kinds of other things. And when we start to think about the fact that the power of these sounds that we can make with our voice and the ancient uses of this by monks who are chanting mantras and chanting Om sounds and chanting things like from various cultures, we see that the shape and the contours of all the different ways that we can use different parts of the mouth to manipulate these sounds, and that various of these sounds are represented by symbols that we call language. We can see that when we start to look at language and start to research language. So I went on a massive research of language, particularly the English language, and that's where you divide various parts of English language into labials and dentals and gutturals and palatal letters. For instance, M is a labial. Labial means lips, so I'm touching my lips together, right? And T is palatal. I touch the tip of my tongue to the roof of my mouth up behind my top teeth. A S is another one where if you try to pronounce that, you'll see it's something you do with your mouth and something you do with your tongue, and that's called a sibilant. It creates a high frequency sound. So with older people who start to lose their higher range of hearing, the S part of the S begins to disappear. You can't hear it anymore because the frequency is too high, and you can't distinguish the S from an F sound anymore, and it becomes a little difficult to understand what people are saying when they're saying words quickly and fast. You get hung up on, was that an F or an S? When we go deeper into this idea of where all this is coming from, where the Sanskrit alphabet represents waveform shapes represented by a symbol, and those waveform shapes are formed by my mouth like this, and they have this impact into areas of the body as a sound energy transfer, activating all kinds of different centers. This is the nadis, which are the chakras, and their auxiliary chakras and their harmonic chakras and electromagnetic and subtle energy fields. Relates directly to Hans Jenny's work back in the 60s, where he was resonating sand particles on a vibrating sound plate, forming all kinds of different patterns with different frequencies. That is Hans Jenny there with his equipment. And if you can see right in front of him there is the plate with the sand on it. But when we get a little bit deeper into this, the mouth and the voice box and the tongue, portion of the tongue, is supplied by one of the 12 pairs of cranial nerves. These are nerves that come straight out from the brain and branch out into the body. And the reason that we have cranial nerves is because the brain needs instantaneous access of information coming from these nerves, or instantaneous access to the body, sending signals out to the body. So it has nerves coming directly from the brain for doing that. And that would be examples of cranial nerves are the nerves that supply my eyes, my ears, my smell, certain facial muscles, facial sensation, tongue, voice box. These are all examples of things supplied by cranial nerves. The vagus nerve, as you'll see in the picture on the left, the vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve, and that's the core of the parasympathetic nervous system. Innervates organs and glands throughout the body. It's a cranial nerve. And the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system is what drives the system. So when we talk about having a fight or flight response where the sympathetic nervous system turns on and mobilizes my energy to fight for my life, it's really not the sympathetic turning on. It's the parasympathetic turning off. And the sympathetic turns on by default, because the sympathetic, parasympathetic are on a seesaw. When one is on, the other one is off. So and this is homeostasis, neutral. So I should be living in neutral unless I feel my life is threatened. If I feel my life is threatened, then the parasympathetic turns itself off and the sympathetic turns on by default. And then when that is over, I come back to neutral, repair, work on my maintenance list. And then if I eat my food, then the parasympathetic turns on, the sympathetic turns off, and I mobilize my energy to digest my food, eliminate toxins, and do things like that. And when that's over, it should come back to zero. Zero is necessary for healing, prerequisite. It's a prerequisite for higher states of consciousness and meditation. And in the realm of the sympathetic, here's the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system. You can see that on the left side in green is the sympathetic nervous system, and that's formed from spinal nerve roots coming out of the thoracic spine down to about L2, and those nerves come out into what's called the sympathetic chain that I talked about last time. And then out from the other side of the sympathetic chain, some of them band together into what's called postganglionic plexuses. And you can see those represented there as little kind of golden balls. The collateral ganglion is one of those. And then only after the postganglionic plexuses do those nerves come out into the organs themselves. And on the right, you can see the parasympathetic nervous system arises from the brainstem areas of the 10th cranial nerve, that's the vagus nerve. And just above that, you can see the cranial nerve number 9, and above that, cranial nerve number 7. And it was recently discovered 5 or 6 years ago that the cranial nerve number 9 is a secondary neuron of control of the parasympathetic nervous system. So human beings are unique in the fact that we have a sympathetic nervous system for activating a fight or flight response. As in all mammals, vertebrate mammals are set up the same way, except human beings have an auxiliary control neuron for controlling the parasympathetic nervous system response. That means that you look at my girlfriend, you die. But something else comes in and says, oh, wait a second, dude, there's like electric chairs and courts and jail if you do that. And you kind of cool off. I call it the civilization neuron, and that's the 9th cranial nerve neuron. And the 9th cranial nerve neuron just happens to be this one on the right, the glossopharyngeal nerve. And you can see it's right next to the vagus nerve, labeled at the top there. And you can see they both supply the carotid artery. They both go down the esophagus. They both go into the stomach. And that's where the two of them branch and link together. And that's how one can influence the other. So the glossopharyngeal nerve, the reason I'm bringing this up is because the glossopharyngeal nerve is a cranial nerve that involves branches of the nerves going into your tongue and your mouth and your lips and your voice box. This is the cranial nerve of control of making sound. And it's directly related to the vagus nerve, which controls all my body processes and all my organs and gland function in the process of the stress response versus the relaxation response, and the ability to control neutral homeostasis, which is what's required to enter into these higher meditation states. So when I do language, when I'm talking to you now, I'm activating my glossopharyngeal nerve to do all this stuff. And that nerve is a secondary neuron control of the autonomic nervous system itself. And the autonomic nervous system, as we've seen before, is heavily involved in this idea of Ida and Pingala, this diagram on the left, which the central channel coming down through the chakras is the spinal cord, called Shushumna, and those two weaving branches going around right and left is Ida and Pingala. That's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, which end themselves up in the brow chakra as the two snake heads, where it ends not in the pituitary gland, but in who tells the pituitary gland what to do. It's actually in the hypothalamus, a tiny little area in the center of the brain that has little tiny organelles that control the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, which form the origin of the branches of those nerves that eventually come out in your brainstem and is called the vagus nerve. Really, the vagus nerve is the branch of the nerve that has its origin in the center of your brain in the hypothalamus, which is where those two weaving Ida and Pingala, the sympathetic, parasympathetic, come up and face each other in those organelles inside the hypothalamus. And right in front of the hypothalamus is dangling down the pituitary gland, which is controlled directly from organelles inside the hypothalamus. So when we talk about chanting Om, we're activating our autonomic nervous system through its secondary control neuron. And when we do this meditation with chanting a mantra or chanting a Sanskrit syllable or chanting the Om frequency, which now activates the deepest part of my collective unconscious mind back to the origin of all things, when we combine this with our understanding that we talked about before of the quantum field, where my body is made of cells, or made of compounds, or made of atoms, or made of quarks and charms and hadrons and leptons and Z bosons, and eventually the smallest particle you break open, there's nothing inside except energy pattern relationships in a state of vibration, forming a pattern in something that we can't see or measure. So the void and the vacuum of space is not empty. It's a substance of the most extreme esoteric subtlety. The subtlest substance in existence is spirit, is consciousness itself. And the densest form of energy is matter. And that is what Einstein was talking about with E equals mc squared. E equals m. Energy equals matter. The two are two different aspects of the same thing. One is most condensed form, one is its most refined form. So from that standpoint, consciousness itself is the most refined form of matter, and matter is the more condensed form of energy. equals mc squared shows just how much energy is contained in the smallest particle of matter, which is defined as an atom, the smallest particle of matter that can be and still retain its characteristics. That's where I talked about that whole thing with the live stream we did entitled The Wall, which is the periodic table. This book is another one, The Undiscovered Universe by Terence Witt, Null Physics. He takes on something that is deeply talked about in the Vedas and in the Upanishads and in the Sutras of Patanjali, and swirls around this concept of Om, the original vibration. Because when you go to the deepest level of the quantum field and all you see is something is vibrating, forming harmonic patterns as standing waves, and that's what I am, nested standing waves, infinite number of standing waves that make it look like it's solid. What is it that's vibrating? It's consciousness itself that's vibrating, and that's what is talked about in these ancient texts. And that vibration is the Aum thing. That's why Aum goes to the core and the heart of the most primordial sound of all, the original resonance of the infinite field, forming an infinity of every possible pattern and standing wave that there could be, and various of those nest themselves together and form everything in the universe, including you and me. So accessing through sound this original vibration is a mainline direct to the deepest part of who I am, and sound has always been the key to that. I do a lot of work with 3D, and 3D is also important because how my ears hear 3D, we usually don't think about this, is important for accessing that same zone, because this infinite field of vibration represented at the core of this pattern is not like the dancing sand particles on the plate that Hans Jenny put together. It's three-dimensionalized. It's a three-dimensional sand on a plate, if you can imagine that. It's going in all three dimensions. And so this Om thing is a three-dimensional experience. And my brain is wired up in three dimensions in every sense I've got. 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, 2 hemispheres, right-left stereo separation of my body, right? I've got this mirror image thing of right-left in order specifically to pick up 3 dimensions. So 3 dimensions tend to be really important, this idea of using high-tech software and high-tech 3-dimensional microphones in order to make these recordings 3-dimensional. All of my recordings use high-end 3-dimensional processing and special microphones of how the brain picks up 3D. We've got sound coming from 2 speakers on the right here. You can see the sound waves dispersed throughout everywhere, and they bounce off all the surfaces and reach my ear from different angles and from different sides of my head, and that's how I kind of can tell. A sound wave coming from the right will make a sonic shadow on the left half of my head, and so my left ear will pick up the sound a split second after the right ear, so that tells me automatically the sound is coming from the right. Then it creates early, middle, and late reflections of sound bouncing off my body, and the sound will hit the tip of my ear before it hits my head, so my ear is already reflecting out before my head does and before my neck does. So it's really bouncing a reflection of the sound off my body and carrying the shape of my body out into the world, bouncing off the world and coming back with the shape of my body and the shape of the world with it. And my brain picks all that up and builds up an onion layer picture of where I am in 3-dimensional space, and that fleshes out about 95% of my directionality. Sound comes from this way. I know it's coming from this way because it hits this ear first, and this ear shadow picks it up a split second later, but then the reflections coming off my body fill and flush it out, so I know it's not just coming from this way, but it's coming from back up behind me somewhere. And then the last factor is the shape of the ear, what's called the pinnae. Those folds in your ear are no accident. They actually are the world's most advanced frequency filter. Depending on which angle the sound waves are coming to the ear, those folds will bounce the sound into the ear at a different angle and shave very specific frequencies off of the sound. And by analyzing the missing frequencies, my brain can calculate the last 5 degrees of three-dimensional direction. This is an example of what's called the head microphone, where you have the speakers built into the ears of this microphone, and so it picks up the sonic shadow and the reflective patterns and things like that. The microphone is inside the shape of the ear, so you can see they've spent a lot of time creating the pinnae of the ear being pretty much anatomically correct. However, everybody's ear is a different shape based on a general theme, so that means no two people hear the same three-dimensional reality. I have a pair of these right here, this type of microphone. I have also these, so these ones in the middle, they attach to a pair of glasses, and so that puts them on the left side of my head, so my head becomes the microphone instead of the plastic head. It's my actual head with these microphones on my own head, which creates this whole three-dimensional sound field through headphones, which is partly the reason why I'm always encouraging the use of headphones in these sessions to listen to these soundtracks, like we're going to do right now. The track that I've chosen for today is actually the Epsilon soundtrack that I used once before a long time ago in one of these live streams. The reason I'm choosing that one is because it's the tambura instrument from India, which is closely associated with the Om chant. And I've modified this soundtrack just for this particular session today. I've extra 3D'ized it, and I've built in on top of the Epsilon, which is Epsilon brain state, is the metaphysical brain state. It's where physical and metaphysical come together. It's the metaphysical end of that. And since we're talking about the metaphysical secrets of the original sound with Om, that's where I really needed to go with this. I don't have a standard Om soundtrack that I've ever made and marketed. So this one doesn't have Om. We're going to do the Om. But I layered in on top of this Epsilon brain frequency from the Epsilon track, I've also layered in the default mode network, which has to do with the cosmic consciousness, the 4 zones of the brain, my sense of self on the inside of my skin, my sense of self on what's outside my skin, synchronize those together, I get my normal sense of myself. And these parietal lobe zones of the default mode network have to do with my sense of time, past to the present, present anticipating the future. I synchronize those up and I get my normal sense of the present moment. But research has shown that hypersynchronizing these 4 zones expands my sense of myself on the inside of my skin to begin to synchronize and meld itself with what I consider to be outside of my skin, so it becomes ill-defined. That's a definition of cosmic consciousness. It's me expanding out beyond my own envelope, and my envelope becomes universally large. And the same thing with time. Past and future begin to fuse, and the present moment begins to expand to incorporate all past and all future events. And centering that with epsilon means that we're targeting the metaphysical aspect of what all this means, the highest dimension of the metaphysical meaning of what the world could be from its inception of the original vibration of all vibrations that form everything in the universe and forms the next moment from now, the Om. And so it's important to sing the Om, chant the Om along with the soundtrack. See if you can chant the Om in tune with the key of the tambura instrument that's going. And it should be, and doesn't have to be loud. All you have to do is feel the resonance in your body. And it's a way of also controlling your breath and slowing your breath down over time. So it's as long as you can. As long as you can. That's the idea. So once again, everybody, I hope you have your headphones. These are an essential component of what we do here. Brain entrainment of the group mind into epsilon default mode network with Om as the centerpiece. And what we're doing is trying to open ourselves to accept the vision of what is the perfect world in its seed form, in the original Om, which is everything in its perfect state. That's where we're going with this. So let's close our eyes and let's begin. Thank you all. We'll see you next Sunday.